Hi, friends, and welcome to the School Librarian Learning Network podcast. I'm Steve Tatro, also known as Dr. T Loves Books, and I love talking about all things related to school libraries. I may be an old dog, but I'm always trying to learn new tricks. That's why in each episode of the SLLN podcast, I'll chat with a school librarian about a lesson, program, or activity they love. Hopefully, this can be a place for school librarians to get ideas and find new ways to engage with their students and staff. As a good friend likes to say, we're better together. So I hope this podcast will help school librarians connect with and learn from each other. The opinions and ideas shared in this podcast by myself and my guests are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. And because school librarians always strive to be good digital citizens, I cite sources when using material that is not my own. Without further ado, let's get to this week's episode. Hey everybody, I am back, and I want to think of this as a return guest, but this is actually the first time Ryan's been here on this particular podcast, but he was here with me in One Lesson at a Time when we were doing that, and he had an awesome lesson to share, which we're going to do as a throwback at some point soon, I promise. But today, we've got Ryan here to talk about some other awesome ideas and how school librarians can help support the teachers and the students in some different ways than maybe we usually think of. So, without further ado, we've got Ryan. Ryan, why don't you take a second, introduce yourself to everybody so they'll know who you are.
Sure. It's good to be with you, Steve. My name's Ryan Bani Tahmaseb. I'm an academic coach and author. I also do some curriculum development these days as well. I'm also a former school librarian and English teacher.
You have had quite a journey as you have made your way from place to place in your career here.
Yes.
So
Indeed.
what was your journey actually to get to the school library? And then how did you kind of evolve from that?
Sure. Well, I loved teaching English. I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade English for 8 years or so. And I loved it. I mean, just reading and writing with students, such a dream. And I think the desire to kind of branch out of it I started feeling that deep inside.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to work with not just middle school students. I wanted to, try working with some younger students as well, because I worked at a K-8 school at the time. So both as an English teacher and as a school librarian, I transitioned from English teacher to school librarian at that same school.
Nice.
And I also wanted to do some co-teaching was the other part of it.
Yeah, that's something that as English teachers, we don't always get the opportunity to kind of collaborate with others.
Yes, exactly. And I did do it from time to time. And it was always my favorite kind of teaching because you get to bounce ideas, back and forth. You get, extra support in the classroom. I love those collaborations. So I was looking for more of that. Mm-hmm. And I was also seeing from things I was reading and seeing that school librarians were doing such interesting things.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just, the kind of the guardians of the books and the library. Right? And so I was like, oh, they're doing all sorts of things with different kinds of literacies, like digital literacy, visual literacy. And I always have been interested in those things. Even in college, my degree was in media studies. And so I studied film, TV, and radio. And so I had all, interest in not just textual literacy, but visual literacies as well. And so anyway, I just felt like it seemed promising to break into school librarianship at that time. And I did. And it proved to be just as fruitful and as exciting and collaborative as I was hoping.
Yeah.
And then I did that for 7 years. And then because of a variety of different reasons, our family moved from the greater Boston area where we had been for a long time to the southern coast of Maine. So we're actually not far from where we were before. We're at the kind of bottom tip, the southeast coast of Maine. And we're just like an hour from where we were before. And
might only be an hour physically, but that is a big hour's difference in terms of mindset and location. And I mean, as somebody who grew up in New England, believe me, I know that Massachusetts to Maine may not seem like much on a map, but it's a world of difference.
It really is. Yeah. When you cross over the bridge that is in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which is only about 15 minutes from us, it is like, it's like you're crossing over into like a kind of a different mode of being in some ways.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up in New England?
I was in Rhode Island. I grew up,
Oh,
spent all of my childhood and early adulthood down in RI. And so I
wow.
was all over New England, especially New Hampshire. Loved going up there to go skiing and hiking and
Yeah.
stuff. So, yeah,
Wow,
fond
I love
memories.
that.
Yeah. We
Well,
were practically neighbors.
if you ever find yourself in like the Portsmouth, New Hampshire area, southern Maine, would love to connect.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Love it.
Yeah,
So,
so
sorry, you
yeah,
made
so we
that
moved
move.
up
I interrupted
here.
you.
No, no worries. That's great. I love that you're a New Englander. Yeah, so I moved up here, and I knew when I was leaving my school that I wanted to start my own academic coaching business. And so I had lots of connections with the schools in the greater Boston area from all the years I had spent working down there, and so I knew I could kind of build on those a bit. And so yeah, I now work as the bulk of my work these days is working as an academic coach with students on reading, writing, and executive functioning skills.
Hmm.
And given my own son's learning profile, he's only 7, but he was diagnosed, I think 2.5 years ago now, with ADHD, and he's also gifted, academically, cognitively gifted, and so that combination where you have some form of neurodivergence and giftedness is called
Mm-hmm.
twice exceptional. That's that
Mm-hmm.
learning profile, and it's pretty rare, but it's often it is underdiagnosed. And so I'm just putting that out there for any listeners who, might have students or even children who kind of might fit that criteria. It's really worth looking into, and there's lots of really helpful resources out there about it. Anyway, now given our own son's experience in school, uh, I've found myself working primarily with neurodivergent students.
Hmm.
So it's been a really rewarding experience doing that, and having these. I've been telling people I've loved building these long-term one-on-one relationships with students. It's so different from the classroom. Like
Yeah.
I don't know, I didn't expect to love it as much as I have. I should have probably understood from the get-go that you know meeting one-on-one regularly with individual students would lend itself really nicely to building and sustaining these kind of really cool relationships.
Yeah.
But it kind of took me by surprise. I really love it. And so I do that. And then I also do some curriculum development. Like I create lessons or curriculum guides sometimes for publishers and authors. And I love that work as well. And then the other reason for this new kind of career for me is that I also am an author. So I write primarily for children and young adults, and I wanted to have daytime hours to devote to that
Mm.
because obviously most of my student facing work is in the late afternoons and evenings when students are home from school.
Right.
And so that gives me daytime hours to do the writing projects that are close to my heart.
I love it, man. And you talk about working with students one on one. For a while, I was tutoring a student for several years through his high school years, and he was a student that I had in school, and I knew him around the school. But you're right, that connection that you build gives you such a different set of insights into the student, and really helps you to not just understand them, but work with them in ways that you might not otherwise get the opportunity to in school.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so special. Yeah. Agreed.
And it sounds like the stuff you're doing is kind of sort of almost an outgrowth of like one-on-one school librarianship in a way, because you're kind of like working on with these kids on a lot of the skills that you would have been working with the entire school on as the school librarian.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I work with a range of students too. So it's not just neurodivergent students, and it's not just, not one type of student. I also do kind of what I would consider academic enrichment for students who are like huge readers and really talented writers and just want to be stretched and also have kind of like a creative writing mentor too.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been really fun as well, being able to meet with students who love writing. And you're right, it is an extension of the school librarianship because I'm drawing on all of the skills I developed as a school librarian in terms of curating books, staying on top of what's out there in terms of new books, and just like having kind of a broad understanding of what kinds of resources are out there, even for things like I just got an email from a parent a couple days ago asking for, like, they're doing some kind of long-term, their child is doing some kind of longer term independent reading and writing project, and just asking me for tips and or books that they might, use with that student, that, their child. And so I was able to, just like look in my, personal library and kind of like go through old emails and just find, pretty quickly some resources and ideas to send along. And those are all skills and resources that to your point, that I've kind of built up during my time as a school librarian.
It's funny. I mean, until we started having this conversation, I wasn't really thinking about it, but it's school librarians almost, and I'm not trying to slight any tutors or individual instruction coaches that are out there, but school librarians almost have an unfair advantage in that area, because one of the things we do is we're always looking around for like, what else is new? What else can I bring my students? And as an English teacher, and I'm only speaking of my own experience, and there's probably other much better English teachers out there than I, but I kind of was in a silo of, okay, here are the things that I have to teach and here are the things I have to pay attention to. And so I knew those 4 or 5 texts inside and out, but like my wider reading experience maybe wasn't as there as much. And now I feel like I've got a much broader collection to work from, both figuratively and literally. But that's
a really great skill, right? I mean, just knowing what's available. I feel like I feel like incredibly underrated. Yeah, I mean, I have students whose families reach out to me because they are not big readers. That has not the majority of the students I work with, but that's definitely, especially the first few students I kind of took on. It was like, I wouldn't call them struggling readers exactly, but they're maybe reluctant readers is probably a better term. And I feel like as a librarian, you don't have to have read all the books that you're going to recommend, but you just from, working with students over the years and recommending books and hearing what students like, and you getting a sense of a student's personality and being able to, recommend books based on their personality. That kind of stuff has been really important in the work that I do now.
Yeah, I can totally understand how that would be the case. Like I said, I think you've almost got an unfair advantage, but it's a good unfair advantage. It's a good way to help kids. So you're helping them with reading sometimes, but you're also helping them with writing. And that's kind of where we're going today, is to talk a little bit about bringing those writing skills to our students in some ways. So what are some things that you're looking at or thinking about as you're thinking about the writing skills for our students?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like one of the things I've noticed as I'm working not exclusively, but primarily these days with high schoolers. Okay. And I'm noticing, and I was so guilty of this as an English teacher, but really, I would argue kind of going overboard with the analytical writing. And while that's really important, there's no doubt that learning how to analyze a text well and effectively and develop a unique argument that you can support with, the text. It's not just helpful for, doing well in English class, but I think that's a skill that does transfer kind of more broadly.
Yeah.
That said, I would argue creative writing is just as important to teach. And again, like now that I'm working primarily with high schoolers, I'm noticing they're just doing less and less of it as they kind of go up the years in school. And that's one of the things I want to talk about today, because I feel like it's so important to, not only practice creative writing, and I'm going to argue primarily for fiction writing today, not only to develop their own unique voice as a writer, but also those are skills that, again, talking about transferring skills, like those also transfer more broadly as helping them become effective communicators in general. And I also, years ago, at a course I took at the University of New Hampshire, I think this was Tom Newkirk. It was a talk he was giving. He was a University of New Hampshire professor for a long time in their English department. And he made a point that has stuck with me ever since. And that was that any form of effective communication is a narrative, is a story. And so anything from like a business presentation, to a commercial, a letter or email, like it's not just stories, it's not just short stories or novels, but good communication tends to be framed as a story. And so that idea has stuck with me. And so that's one of the reasons too that I feel like fiction writing and teaching effective fiction writing can be such a helpful thing for students to practice throughout their kind of K to 12 experience. And it's for most students, if taught effectively, is really fun too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, like you're talking about how analytical writing is something we tend to focus on in English class. And I think that's 112% true. Like that is so much of what I taught and so much of what my colleagues teach still. And
Yeah.
it's funny, I was just having a conversation recently with somebody about how we talk about reading across the curriculum, but we don't really do it. Like it's always English class is reading and writing. And I think we miss the fact that writing should also be an across the curriculum skill. Like I'll say our social studies department in my school is very good at getting the kids working on that kind of analytical writing where they've got to have the primary sources and explain why they think what their idea is based on the evidence that they have. That's something that I think we absolutely could be taking off the English teachers' plates and saying, okay, look, social studies is doing this. Science class, you're going to have to explain how you drew your conclusions based on the evidence. Like there's so many opportunities to do it. And I think we underutilize those opportunities. And
right. I 100% agree.
Yeah.
I also, this idea actually came up in when I was doing some research for my first book, which is a professional development book for teachers and librarians and administrators about school librarianship. And this idea of the meta curriculum, I had never heard that term before, but it's basically what you're saying. Like this idea, like writing would be a skill that should be a part of the meta curriculum, the curriculum that's kind of like above the all the individual curricula.
Right.
Writing is a skill that should be in that, as should, I think I would argue others, like especially in like an elementary school, like social emotional learning should be part of the meta curriculum, right? It shouldn't just be for a social emotional class.
Right.
It can be that, but it should also be integrated into all the others as well.
Right. And talking about creative writing, and communication, one of the things I have heard so many times in the past several years with all of the advocacy that's been going on for school librarianship is who's telling your story. You need to tell your story. And hearing you say we need to think about how we teach those skills, we absolutely do, because like you're saying, telling our story from our perspective is going to give people a different understanding of what's going on than just giving facts and figures. So I love that you're incorporating this and thinking through like the ways that this applies beyond just in a classroom for a grade. Like this is actual important life skills that I think it's easy to sort of push aside when we think, oh, they're writing stories. But yes, they're writing stories, but they're writing stories for purpose. Like they're writing stories for building those skills.
Right. Yeah. And the other piece that I feel like is really important too is, and this is something that I've written and talked about a lot, is the importance of writing with and for your students. I feel like a lot of us do this already to some extent, but I do think like there are ways to do this as a school librarian too. Like when you're asking your students to create a specific kind of project that involves writing, actually taking the time beforehand to produce a model or an attempt at a model, at least of that piece, even if it's just a paragraph. We do this with like showing them how to cite something properly, at times. Like that's an example, like a micro example of it, I suppose. But I also feel like, I learned this a few years into teaching English. Like if I'm going to ask my students to draft regularly and share their writing with an audience, which requires a lot of vulnerability, and I should model that as well. And it's kind of a separate conversation, but that's ultimately what led me into doing more of my own creative writing in the first place, and taking my own writing more seriously. That's just an aside, but either way, it's so important because then they see that you're invested in the process. The benefits are endless from that, what I just shared about they're seeing that you're invested, that you care, that you're taking it seriously, but also you learn pretty quickly how difficult some of the assignments that you're giving them are,
Yeah.
and you can talk them through how you navigated through those challenges. And like you can break it down for them quite specifically after you've been through it. And obviously it takes more time on the front end. It does take a little bit more time, no question. But I feel like the kind of learning that happens after you've done that, like pre-work, is so rich and so ultimately rewarding that the benefits kind of far outweigh the small con of it.
Yeah.
The pros outweigh the one con of it taking a little bit more time.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, there's this belief among a lot of educators, and I will count myself among them for the longest time until very recently, that we're supposed to be the possessors of all knowledge, and we're supposed to arrive to class completely prepared to handle every situation and every possibility. And here are all the examples you might possibly need, already ready to go so we can show it all. And I feel like it's only recently that I've come to really think about the fact that we are robbing our students of the opportunity to see how did we reach that point? Because we don't arrive fully formed with all of the answers. And sometimes we're not even going to have the answers, but there's often this concern that like, oh no, if I don't have the answer, people are going to think I don't know what I'm doing. It's like, no, you are the expert because you know how to overcome those challenges, not because you have arrived preloaded with answers, And if we could take that time to show the students, sometimes I don't know exactly how this is going to go. And there was a point in my English career where I started to try and do what you're talking about and write the examples for the students, like as we were talking about them in class, to be like, okay, let me see what I can come up with and write on the projector, try and do it out. And there were times when I got stuck and I was like, you know what, guys, this is what I came up with. And it's not great, but you can at least see where I'm trying to go here, and talking through my process and showing them. Sometimes I get stuck too. And like, I'm supposed to be the expert and it's okay that I got stuck. So there's so much value in that. And I think even as whether you're a teacher or a school librarian or whatever it is, being willing to accept that we may not have the answer or the example right there is an important part of the learning process. And I think it's too easy to skip over,
Yeah, that that live writing in front of your students on a projector that you're talking about is such a vulnerable thing for teachers. Sometimes it becomes less so the more you do it, but it doesn't ever stop being vulnerable in some way. And it's so helpful. And I would argue, and I'm sure, well, I'm not going to speak for you, but I would imagine that you felt this way too, that it's actually in the moments where you do get stuck, because it happens, that you're narrating your own kind of thinking and when you do that actually, I would argue, is the most helpful part of that process for the students. Not because they're seeing you struggle, but because they're seeing you think through a problem live, and you're narrating it for them so they can kind of mirror that or mimic that when they go to do it on their own. And I feel like that's invaluable.
Well, I would say yes. And I think the struggle is a very important part for them to see, because I think they need to know that they're not the only ones that might be struggling with something. Like they need to see that, oh no, when I run into a mental block as a student, sometimes I think a lot of our students, when I was a student, this happened to me all the time. I'd hit a point where I was like, oh, I don't know what to do. And I must just not understand what's going on. And I must just not be very good at this. And not understanding that struggle is part of it, because all the time before that, I was handed stuff without any apparent struggle by the people around me, by the teachers and the other students. And just everybody was, here's my finished product. And, oh, look, isn't it so great? And I'm like, I really had to pull teeth to get, to where I was. So I think the struggle element of it absolutely can be an important part too. But sorry, we could, I'm sure you and I could talk ELA all day, but.
Yeah, no, it's good. But I do think it transfers. I think a lot of the stuff does come up, when school librarians are asking students to kind of complete projects of any kind that involve writing or sharing their work with others.
We talk, as school librarians, we talk about so many different literacies. And I think writing literacy is one that tends to get kind of foisted off in other directions, but there's a place for it, I think, in the library as well as in other classes. So sorry, I keep proselytizing. I'm preaching to the choir here, so I apologize.
No, it's good. This is all stuff, that's important to me. And I think hopefully will resonate with listeners as well. Yeah. I mean, and then another thing I thought might be worth sharing is in terms of, asking students to write and the importance of fiction writing in general and doing more of it with students, is helping them to identify, especially when things are more open-ended, specific topic ideas that they can get behind, that they can get excited about. And I have found that rapid fire prompts, like sharing prompts and giving students time, like just a little bit of time to respond to each of them, is really helpful in idea generation. And then at the end of the process of you reading a prompt, they write some ideas for a few, 30 seconds or maybe even up to like 4 minutes. And I can break this down a little bit more after I share about it more generally. But then once they have a bunch of ideas on the page or on a Google Doc or wherever, they can choose one of those to pursue, because chances are if they've generated a bunch of ideas, there's at least one in there that they will want to pursue. Usually with some enthusiasm. Yeah. And so, I mean, I feel like there's so many times where students feel like, I don't know how many times you've heard this, but I heard this all the time, that I don't have, a student will say, I don't have any interesting stories. Like, I'm 13. Like nothing much has happened in my life. And they always do, of course. It's just a matter of helping them get to them. And so, like I have, for example, like this especially comes up when they're asked to write like personal stuff, like personal essays or, memoir type writing, where and I have some prompts that I've kind of gathered from various places over the years. Like I'm just like looking at some of these that I've used before. Like, what is one of the most serious conflicts you've been involved in? Write about a big mistake. Write about a time when you took a big chance and what the result was. Write about an interesting experience you've had with a neighbor. Write about your most memorable birthday. I love this one. Write about questions you have for the universe. Optional. Include an answer key. And so, like there's so many. So with those, for example, I would, read them out. Read one, give them about 30 seconds to jot down ideas. And I tell them beforehand, you're not going to have time to write down like a lot right now. It's just like getting the initial, even if it's just a few words that will trigger, your memory when you go back in a few minutes to choose one idea to pursue. Just the act of coming up with all of these different ideas is incredibly fun and generative time, and it doesn't take that long, especially when you're doing it that way. But with fiction, I found you need to give them a little bit more time. And so Readsy, the website Readsy, REEDSY, has some great fiction writing prompts. I mean, if you just Google Readsy fiction prompts or just Readsy prompts, you will get a list that's updated regularly of great writing prompts. And with those, I typically give them about 4 minutes to write. And it's amazing. Typically, even the students who aren't able to get a story going very quickly for the first, it's almost like they produce more text as they go, because those creative muscles are warmed up. They tend to be able to get going with more efficiency. And excitement in some cases.
I love this idea. It's almost like a combination in my mind. I'm sort of seeing like choice board assignment sorts of things, because you're giving them options, you're giving them agency, you're giving them the ability to find the thing that works for them.
Yes.
And it's also a little bit like doing speed dating for books, where you're giving them just a little bit of time to try out a couple of different things and figure out what works, what's the one that's grabbing them the most. Like there's that shared thread of how can we expose them to a lot of things and help them find the thing that works best for them.
Right. Yeah. Because that's That's ultimately what I feel like is one of my primary goals for my work with students, is helping them to identify what they enjoy and giving them the freedom and agency to pursue those interests. Because without fail, when we give them that freedom, the work that they do is inevitably much stronger, much more enjoyable for them to do, and
much more enjoyable for us to consume.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's like the idea of like no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. This idea that, if you are putting the emotion into the writing, it's going to translate. The whoever's reading it or listening to it later is going to pick up on that energy in the writing. And then even even with like things like classroom management, like that becomes less of an issue when the students are more organically or innately engaged in the work.
Man, and now you've got me thinking about what a fun thing this could be to do with like collaboration with an English teacher, to be like, I'm going to come in and I'm going to book talk like 10 books. And as I book talk, I'm going to pause, and then the kids are going to write where they think the story goes, or, what's their take on how that might be. Cause book talk's only going to give you the barest thumbnail of what's going on. So,
yes,
giving them the opportunity to sort of like guess where things go next. And then, okay, so like based on that, now you've got some reading or some writing, seeds to get started with, and maybe also remind you later of, oh, that's right, that's a book I want to borrow. So like win-win for everybody involved, right?
Yeah. Yes. And librarians can also be really supportive with this in terms of like, let's say that students are being asked to write in a specific genre, or even format. The librarian can, of course, come in prepared with a kind of curated selection of books that are good examples or good models of that particular genre or format, and then can share with the student and the teacher, the students and the teacher, some excerpts from those that you find particularly effective for whatever reason. And then there are so many benefits to that, of course. And then most notably that students have specific examples or specific models that they can look at and try to imitate in their own way. And that's a really, I used to love that kind of stuff as a school librarian, like finding like different examples of a particular kind of book.
It's funny. I think of school librarians as being partners in literacy, often with books and reading, but you're opening up this whole new way of thinking for me, that we can be partners in writing by, like you're saying, curating selections that we like and sharing those with the English teachers, sharing them with classes, talking about why we like particular passages. What is it about the writing that grabs us? And take our ability to sort of inspire the students beyond just reading on the page and thinking about how do we create our own works that sort of emulate these.
Totally. Yeah. And then, so that's all the idea generation phase of things that we've been talking about so far. But I also feel like school librarians can be incredibly helpful. This is like another area of expertise, is like once it's time to write and produce the piece of writing that they're supposed to produce, the school librarian can talk to the teacher about possibilities of helping students tell their stories in multiple modalities, in multiple ways. Like whether that's creating, their own comic strip, or, any kind of, maybe a series of interrelated stories paired with their own illustrations for those who enjoy creating art, or drawing or painting or whatever. I've had students tell stories in which they've recorded themselves narrating a world that they've created in Minecraft. It could be an ebook that they create with Book Creator. There's so many different possibilities, and giving them maybe a list of options is helpful. Again, like going back to this idea of lists and options, that can be really helpful to kind of get their ideas off the ground a bit, perhaps, or just to inspire them. But they also often have specific ideas, like, can I do? I saw this was an option. Can I do this? And they have some idea that's better than any that you listed on the page.
Yeah.
That happens all the time, of course. But yeah, just giving them, they'll need some basic parameters. So I think rubrics are helpful in that regard. Like, it has to include these specific elements and, and to show them specifically, like not show them, but maybe name for them specifically what the qualities of those aspects done effectively would be, just like a pretty standard rubric for a project. But otherwise giving them the freedom of how to express it. Again, that's even more of that. That's helping them tap into their own strengths and interests in a way that's going to provide all those benefits that we already talked about. Like, less issues with classroom management, more engagement, more interesting to read or look at or listen to later.
And we can also give them those opportunities to understand that their writing is valued by saying we are going to feature it. Like we always have different kinds of student displays going on in the library, but so often I feel like they're like, oh, the art teacher has, paintings and sculptures. And I think it's very, in my experience, and I could just not be aware, so I'm not trying to denigrate anybody, but I feel like in my experience, I have very rarely seen writing projects featured in the library. And the other day, it was funny. I had a student who was in the library, he was there to just spend time in the library, and he was working on a computer, and he said, I'm working on a book. When I'm done, can I put it in the library? And I was like, let's talk. Like we can definitely make something happen here. But what a great opportunity that would be to have students, like to give students a shelf in the library and be like, these are student works. Come check out what your peers have put together, or, sections on your website for student writing projects or whatever they might be. So show that value. Like we value what you create. We don't just expect you to make it because we say to make it.
Yes, absolutely. One of the most, challenging, at least for me initially, but rewarding experiences I had actually as an English teacher, but collaborating with the then school librarian, was to have our students, I was teaching middle school English again, and we had our students create their own picture books for the younger students. And so it was a wonderful project that involved researching picture books and what makes them tick, and then creating their own art, whether hand-drawn, digitally, however they wanted to make them. We also involved the person, they have different titles at different schools, but if the school has a makerspace and maybe a teacher who works, and this, as is often the librarian. But in some schools, they have their own dedicated person for a makerspace at times, or just a technology teacher in general might be the person that I'm thinking about here. But the idea is it can be multiple teachers, multiple adults kind of navigating that students, creating something to be enjoyed by younger students. So they also have a specific audience in mind, which is really helpful. And, involves research, it involves writing, it involves making. And so I think this is what I'm talking, like, this is the kind of project, for example, that I was talking about, kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation about like the exciting world of school librarianship, because you have these opportunities, or you can create these opportunities to work with other professionals and do some really cool projects that teach the skills that you need to teach as a school librarian. Like you have these, ideally you have understanding goals, whether those are, dictated by or influenced by the AASL standards or whatever, but you have these specific goals. But what are some fun, creative ways that you can kind of help students create things that involve the teaching and use of those skills?
Yeah, I think too often educators across the board see standards of whatever kind as a checklist of things they are required to cover, and that's an easy stance to take. It's easy to see it that way, and I think sometimes we lose the fact that the standards aren't meant to be a checklist. They're meant to be sort of a guide for skills our students should know how to employ. So when we can figure out ways like you're talking about to make those standards important to the kids, not as a standard, but as a skill that they are able to utilize effectively, that's when the kids not only learn the skill better, but we get better product out of them. So
yes,
it's win-win when we can do that, you know?
Agreed.
Man, there is so much great stuff here that I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, because there's so many ways that you're sort of stretching my mind here as we are talking through these many possibilities here that we can do with getting our students, engaged and involved in creating in so many different ways.
Awesome.
So we had kind of started with a general, we're going to sort of help students with creative writing. And you brought us to like helping them think through a couple of different prompts. When you're working them through a couple of different prompts, like is there a particular direction you take them in once they've had a chance to sort of think through where they might want to go with some of the writing they're doing?
Yeah, I think it depends on how I've framed whatever the project is. Like, if we're doing fiction, for example, then once they have an idea that they're excited about, actually, you know what? One thing, I haven't done this in a bit, but because I'm working with individual students these days, but one really fun way to help them choose ultimately come to a kind of final decision on what to write about is to kind of along the speed dating idea line that you had mentioned earlier, is having the students choose maybe their top 2 or 3 ideas that they might want to write about, and then pitch them to a group of other students and to ask them what they would be most excited to read.
Yeah.
And so that gets them really engaged in the whole process of, it kind of at an early stage helps them remember that they're writing for an audience, and just hearing what other people are excited about can be helpful. It may not, ultimately sway them away from the idea they are personally most excited about. And I think that's probably a good thing. But just like, if an idea of this crazy thing that happened to them when at, their 6th birthday party makes 2 other students laugh, then, that they sense that energy around that idea right off the bat. And they're like, oh, this could be really fun to write if I'm getting reaction from them right now.
Yeah. And if nothing else, I love when students can sort of cross-pollinate, because sometimes the idea that I share maybe is not the one I'm going to choose to work on, but somebody else might go, oh, that actually reminds me of, or, oh, wow, what if you did? And maybe that student starts taking that idea and exploring it too. So giving them as many opportunities to work together as possible is always great.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like, and from there, once they've chosen an idea, I think that's when it's helpful to share models with them of that particular genre or format done well. And that's where you can share your own writing. That's where you can have the school librarian come in and share examples of maybe an effective introduction, or introduction is more of like a essay term, but an effective opening or first paragraph of a novel or whatever, or a short story. Regardless, just effective models that they can aspire to, not just reading them though, but reading this, it takes some time, like maybe even a whole class period in some cases, depending on how long the class is, but breaking it. I feel like this stage is so important to read the example aloud together, and we look at it together as well. So we're looking at it on a screen, and reading it together, and then simultaneously taking notes together. What I would do is I would just create a Google Doc, and I would be the one taking the notes and soliciting the ideas from students on what is effective about that particular piece of writing. And then once done, once we have that list, which again could take the whole period in some cases, then sharing that or printing that for students. And then they have that list of things to keep in mind or try to imitate in their own writing, and they can refer back to it as they go.
That's
really
interesting. Yeah. I just recently, a couple of weeks ago, one of my reading coaches came to me, reading and writing coaches came to me and said, I've got a group of about 15 kids. Can you pull 15 books in like sort of different genres and styles and stuff that they could look at to get a sense of different openings for different stories? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I got books, I spread them out all over the library. Yeah. And so she had the kids come in, and instead of working together, they worked individually, but it was basically like, okay, you're going to sit down, you're going to read for like 5 minutes, and then you're going to write for like 2-3 minutes. What did you like or dislike about this opening? Like, what were the moves that the author was making that you can take away from that? And then she individually conferenced with them after maybe they'd seen 3 or 4 or 5 different openings and said, so of the ones you've seen, what most spoke to you? And that's what you're going to try and emulate for your own memoir, personal narrative. And I was thinking like, wow, that's a really cool idea that she's doing. But I love yours, like taking that extension step and saying, let's work together to think about what the opening is. And let's read it together, because some of the students may not have maybe the reading skill to hear the author's intent in the words. So they may be reading the words, but not necessarily understanding what the moves are that are going on in the beginning. So having the educator in the room read it out loud to hear everybody, so everybody can kind of hear it the way the author intended it.
Yeah.
And then kind of collaborate. Oh boy.
Yeah. It's like it's almost like they're scaffolding for each other.
Yeah.
And just, and obviously when you put like a bunch of creative minds in one space and people start sharing, you're just inspired by what the other people say. And it kind of going back to this idea of students surprising you with better ideas. Like before I would do something like that, I would typically have specific things in mind that I want to point out and address, like that I think are effective and whatever that piece of writing we're looking at together is. But they always have ideas that I didn't think about that are even more interesting to me than my own.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how I taught Romeo and Juliet for 20 years. And by the end, I was like, I know everything there is to know. And as we talked through it, every year, there was something that somebody said that I was like, how did I never see that before? Like when we give them that chance.
Actually, yes.
Yeah.
And I think we got into a little mini fake argument about the best Shakespeare play last time. I think I was a Tempest guy. And is Romeo and Juliet your favorite?
I would say it's pretty darn close to the top of my list. Yeah. There's so many cool things going on in it.
There's a lot going on. That's fun.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love how you're helping your students think through not just their own skills, but their own mastery and their own interests while they're doing this, which is, I think, the pinnacle of what we can do as educators when we can get them invested in their learning. And that sounds like so much of what you're doing here, which is awesome. I really love it. Yeah. If we've got folks out there who maybe haven't been working in the space as much, do you have any suggestions or recommendations that they might want to think about if they're going to try and help bring this into their libraries or their classrooms?
I think the biggest thing is to just be in communication with the other adults who are working with the students. I mean, even if you're relatively new to the profession or to the role, I feel like pretty early in the school year, you get a sense for who is doing interesting things in the school building and who are people you might want to work with and collaborate with. And so I think, starting conversations with those folks early on can be really beneficial and energizing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, very much so. I was very energized when that teacher came in and was like, hey, can we do this thing? I was like, oh, I never even thought about this. This is great.
The other thing I did, I tried to do, and it's hard, of course, to not be to leave school but sometimes when you need to do some professional development, I feel very strongly actually that the best form of professional development is simply going to other schools and observing and seeing how different educators in your particular role do what they do. And just like, it could be a half a day, it could be a couple hours. I think in some cases, the longer, the better, because not only will you get really interesting insights into what other educators in your role are doing that can be helpful and directly applicable to, your day-to-day work life, but also you tend to come away also with specific ideas and insights into what the school in general is doing well, from like transitions between classes, or signage in the library or in the hallways, class lengths. I mean, the list is endless. It's just, I feel like we are not given or creating opportunities nearly enough for teachers to do that. There's so much that we can just learn from each other. I think that's why these podcasts are so helpful and so interesting to people, because it's kind of the virtual audio way of doing just that. Just hearing how other people approach problems or a particular role, and then, having your own takeaways from there. So yeah, I think if you're new, or looking for, ways into anything I've talked about here, is just, I think, again, this applies more generally too, just like, if you want to experiment with something, a particular kind of approach or a particular kind of lesson, seeking out people who might be doing it well elsewhere.
Absolutely. And, I think you're absolutely right that going to another school can be invaluable. But also sometimes, like, I was very fortunate that a while back I was doing a degree in educational administration and supervision. So some of my classwork required me to go and observe teachers in my building.
Great point. Yes.
Just sitting there, not co-teaching, not collaborating, just sitting in the back and just taking some notes and watching what other people did and how they did it truly changed a lot of the things I was doing. And even though I would talk to them regularly as a colleague in meetings or in the hallway or whatever, watching them actually do what they do can be really eye-opening. So
great point.
If you're looking for the easy, like literally across the hall solution, that might be a place to start. And then absolutely talk to your admins about, can I go to other schools too and see how they're doing things? Because like you said, you can get such a hugely different perspective on something that seems really straightforward because this is how we do it. That's not necessarily how everybody's doing it. So
yeah, some schools I know have established professional development programs in-house that enable teachers to do just that. It requires some coordination, of course, but it doesn't have to be super formalized. To your point, like it can just be, do you mind if I just observe? I'm just trying to, come up with some, you can come up with whatever reason you want, really.
Yeah.
I just observe you, and most teachers are totally cool with that.
Yeah, 100%. Well, so many eye-opening and thought-provoking ideas here. I truly, truly appreciate it. We are now going to take our 90-degree turn and go into our book break.
Book break.
I love the book break. You're going to bring us a title that you think people should know about. It can be anything, personal, professional, for staff, for students, for yourself, whatever it is. What's a book you think people might want to have on their radar?
My favorite, so I'm a picture book author. I write for middle grade as well, but I love picture books, as I think many educators and humans in general do. But one I just read that is just so fun and so poignant and funny is, it's called The First Week of School by Drew Beckmeyer. Okay. And it's a really unique picture book that follows a class of students through their, as the title suggests, first week of school. Okay. But there's also I forget what kind of lizard it is. There's some kind of lizard involved, and there's also an alien involved. And it's really cool because you turn the page. It would be a fun, in some case, wonky read aloud because of the way it's written and the way it's structured. But it would also, and for that reason, it would still be fun to read aloud, but it would also be a really fun one for, upper elementary or even middle school students to kind of just like read independently, because it's like multiple stories are happening at once on each page, and you can follow the sequence or trajectory of each of their stories over the course of the book.
Nice.
And so, yeah, like I said, it's both funny and it's kind of moving. And you also have the teacher story as well in that as part of it. And it's a really realistic and I think loving portrayal of teacher. That's not like the teacher is not a stereotype in any way. I'll just put it that.
Okay.
So yeah, that's one that I really loved that I read within the past month.
That's going straight to the top of my TBR list because
Yeah,
that sounds awesome. I love a middle school, a picture book for middle school or even high school because I feel like there's so many things that can be mined from a good picture book that the littles aren't going to necessarily get. Like the littles might enjoy the story, but when you can come to it with maybe a little more of a mature take on things, sometimes you can see things that you would never have noticed as a kid. And so I love when we can get those into kids' hands. So
yeah, agreed.
I might know what my next purchase is for the library here.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
Well, this has been amazing. I truly appreciate you taking the time. If people want to catch up with you, where should they go looking for you online?
Yeah, thanks. My website, ryantahmaseb.com. So Ryan, Tahmaseb. I'm also on Instagram. So sad. I finally deactivated my Twitter account.
Yep.
This past week. Mm-hmm. I'm just so bummed about that. The fact that it's just devolved into the pit that it's become.
Yeah.
It was such a helpful space for so many of us for so long, and it's just not that anymore.
Yeah, unfortunately.
But anyway, yeah. So I'm resisting at the moment Blue Sky, not because I don't think it's great, but I'm just going to take a step away from that kind of like that mm-hmm. particular form of social media for a bit. Yeah. So yeah, Instagram and my website, you can get in touch with me. I'd love to hear from folks. Yeah, those are the options.
Love it. Well, I think you're very wise to take a step back from social media and take a breath. And I think I need to do that. My wife is ready to just throw my phone through the wall. So that might be what I do this afternoon, but we'll see. But truly, thank you. I really appreciate you being here and sharing all this great advice. And hopefully we can talk again sometime soon because this was great.
Absolutely, Steve. It's always great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the SLLN podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for the episode. They feature links to the resources shared by our guest, as well as ways to keep in touch with them and links to the book break recommendations. And stop by the SLLN website, home to a curated list of free upcoming virtual events and resources for school librarians. It's easy to become a member of the School Librarian Learning Network. Just visit the site and use what you like. If you have a comment, an idea, a question, or something you want to share, you can email schoolliblearning@gmail.com. That's schoolliblearning@gmail.com. Know a school librarian with something others could learn from? Let us know. Until next time, be good, be safe, and be well.